All right. And welcome back, you guys, to the Self-Selecting Podcast. I am your host, Corey Hagman. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. Just wrapped up a really fun episode recording with Ariana Brothers. Really just lit a fire under me. Such a good conversation. So at the time that this is released, let me see, is that even gonna be out? Yeah, no, at the time this is released, that will have already been out. So if you haven't caught that episode, if you haven't tuned in to that conversation, I think you guys would really enjoy, especially if you are in the world of bodybuilding, in the world of competing, and are simply just looking to get a better grasp on everything that it takes at pro level. Really good conversation. And I'll start off by saying I really appreciate the feedback that you guys have given on the guest episodes. That has been truly just very heartwarming. I have had a lot of people on that, frankly, like I've admired most of my time in fitness. A lot of people who've impacted me in a very meaningful way. So the fact that you guys are enjoying them as well, that makes me really happy. I'm glad that these conversations are going well. But these episodes definitely aren't going to take over these one-on-one solo episodes. These are released every Monday. So if you're new to the podcast, new to my channel, welcome. Thank you for being here. As always, let me know what you think. Let me know if you like this format. Let me know if there are topics that you want to hear me talk about that I haven't gone into. With all that being said, I'm diving into today's topic, which is how to actually get shredded. How to take your physique to a very impressive level of leanness. And this isn't going to be a clear-cut strategy. It's not going to be a how-to in the sense of like, do these 4 things and then you'll be good to go. I think those are oversimplified, to be honest, and as much as it might do well in terms of like conversions and lead acquisitions to just give you this free guide on like, okay, here's how many calories you eat, here's how much cardio you do, here's the deficit you need to be in, here are the supplements that you need to take, I feel like it's misleading because truly the process, the journey of getting super lean is going to be highly individualized, which you have probably heard. That's probably not your first time hearing it. There isn't a blueprint that you can just simply follow that will guarantee results. And that's why I think for this topic specifically, it makes the most sense to go into it really to exhaustion and all the components that you need to consider if your goal is to get shredded. Because I think a lot of people will set this as their goal. They'll say that, they want to achieve, just a remarkable, an elite level of conditioning, of leanness, very low body fat, without really understanding what it takes to get there. And this isn't me climbing up on a soapbox and saying like, oh, you can't do it. It's very much something that just comes down to being patient and waiting it out, assuming that you are in a deficit. But in this episode today, I will go through really how to map out a plan of how to get shredded, what things you need to consider, and where a lot of people, most people, honestly, go wrong. And I want to start by saying that this is a very ambitious goal. And if you approach it methodically, if you approach it intelligently, you can get there. You can reach this destination. But in this episode, we are going to go through step by step that roadmap of the things that matter most, that will ultimately hold you back. If you don't consider, I guess they won't always hold you back. Some people will persevere and just white knuckle it all the way through. But if you are someone that's like, hey, I've gotten lean before, I've gotten to a lower body fat, but I would like to get even leaner. I want to see like true like anatomy chart visibility in my muscles. I got you. So we're going to dive right in. First thing you need to ask yourself, what does shredded even mean to you? And I want to expand on this because I think that a lot of people will oversimplify the terminology. I want to get shredded. I want to get ripped. And some people say like quite literally, I want to be 10% body fat. I want to weigh X amount of weight. Others just want visible abs. And I think it's important to really pin down whether you are chasing a specific look or an objective metric, whether that be scale weight, whether that be body fat percentage, whether that be DEXA scan coming in and saying that you are this body fat, whether you get calipers done at your local gym, or you do your calipers and they come back with said body fat. If you fixate on scale weight alone, there can definitely be drawbacks to this. A lot of people I work with, myself included, I've experienced this trap where I've focused so much on scale weight and so much on it going down linearly that you end up cutting too aggressively, you end up cutting too much weight, and in the pursuit of, achieving this ultra fit, ultra elite physique, you lose sight of it and, overemphasize the conditioning, the body fat percentage, I guess in an abstract sense. And in a lot of cases, you can end up losing muscle, or you can end up over dieting, so you don't actually look good. Like, people begin to become concerned as to whether or not you're too lean. They begin to wonder whether or not you are going to stop the diet at a certain point. You might even get remarks made about you that you look anorexic. And when it comes to actually reaching said destination of what is shredded for you, I think it's also important to know what is too lean. So if that is the body fat percentage that you're attaining or you're aiming for, what is the point in which you've gone too far? Is there wiggle room in the body fat that you want to attain? Do you not even want to use body fat? Do you just want to say I want to lose a total of 10 pounds or 15 pounds? And if I get to that point and I'm not looking the way I want to look, maybe I'll continue to lose more. Now, I would ask yourself, and this is more like a practical tip, when you say shredded, do you specifically want a six-pack? Do you want vascularity? Do you want striated shoulders? Do you want full visible tie-ins? Or are you aiming for just a scale weight number? Do you want to weigh what you did in high school? Do you want to fit into clothes, a specific size? Do you want your DEXA to come back, reading a certain percentage? Either way, I think you need to have many metrics in order to track said progress, but this also builds out essentially a finish line in a way. And I think, you should generally keep that a little flexible depending on how you're feeling, depending on if, the audit of how you're looking as your physique continues to change, if you begin to feel differently as you get leaner. Oftentimes what I will hear is that individuals will, start to see a little more visibility in the abs, and specifically for women, they'll be like, but I'm losing the curves. I'm not experiencing the physique changes that I want because now my glutes and my hips are much smaller as well. And that's not exactly the look I'm going for. So I think it's also important within establishing your destination that you're aiming for, remembering that different body fats look differently on different people, depending on structure, depending on muscularity. And I can say that how I looked at 18, 19, 20 at 130 pounds is much different now that I am a full grown ass adult and I have more muscle and I've spent time building out my physique in a way, aspiring to build very balanced physique for the bikini division. But 130 at when I was 18, I was like, yo, this is too heavy. I want to be 120. I want to be 115, maybe even 110. And I had no concept of how this would actually look on my physique, how it would translate. Now, you also have to understand the fact that people store body fat differently. Working with a lot of clients, I see that there is a vast discrepancy in where body fat is stored. Some women are very fortunate that they store it in their glutes, in their hips, in their legs, and they store very minimal in their upper body, in their torso, in their waist. And this is something that can feel very defeating if you're like, hey, I store a lot of body fat in my waist or my arms, but I want to have a very clean, sculpted look, even when I'm in clothes. And I just feel like when I'm in a tank top or when I'm in a sports bra, I just don't have that tight look, even though my legs are, very ripped and very detailed. So it's important to understand when we're setting these benchmarks of how to go about getting shredded, that we understand that if you lose body fat last in your waist and your benchmark is also I want to have clearly defined abs and very chiseled obliques or, whatever it might be, this could extend that timeline, or really the, I would say, journey of, getting to that benchmark. If the place that you lose body fat last is also coinciding with the area that you want to use as like an objective marker. And for the bikini division, I can say there's a lot of people who kind of fall into this trap where they want to have the visible tie-ins on stage, or even like in their off season, they want to have good development. They don't want to have cellulite. They don't want to have higher percentages of body fat on their lower body. Yet what they find is that this is also the last place that they lose weight. And this can be frustrating, understandably, but one of the ways that I say, like I've found and I've found for clients that we overcome this is throughout building more density and muscularity, so that the ratio of muscle to fat is a little more favorable. And instead of having to get to a point where you diet where your core is shredded and your upper body's shredded and your lower body's still behind and still is soft and not as tight, building out more muscle will create a more balanced composition in terms of body fat to lean mass. Now, something to consider within establishing this destination, and this is actually something that I heard on Gary Kay's YouTube video. He's a plastic surgeon, and he was going into like setting expectations with clients who are looking to get plastic surgery. And he's like, one of the challenging parts can be that you ask someone like, hey, why is it that you want to get filler in your lips? Why is it that you want to get Botox, or you want to get, I don't know, facelift, whatever. And oftentimes what people are telling you is like, oh, well, like I just want to get it done because I think it'll make me feel better. But what they're not conveying is that, like, and the example he used was like a woman that he had worked with who realistically, like once he was able to unpack what she was looking for, it was the fact that she wanted her husband to notice her whenever she got home from work. She wanted him to think that she looked really beautiful without makeup. She wanted him to compliment her more. She wanted men at the office to think that she was a little more attractive. And it was like through the interview process that he was able to be like, okay, so you're actually wanting, you're wanting like lip filler and like a slew of other things. But the goal that you're actually trying to attain by being here and getting this work done is the fact that you want social recognition. You want people to think you're more attractive, and particularly in the close relationships that you have, you want the males around you to verbalize this. And I thought it was so interesting because it very much resonates with the interview process that I have with my clients, where they might say like, I want my waist to be smaller, I want my glutes to be bigger. But what is it exactly? And oftentimes I tend to have to dig, because the thing that I'm presented with initially isn't necessarily what they want. It's more so the fact that like they want to fit into their clothes better. When they go on vacation, they want to feel like their waist can be teeny tiny relative to their glutes. They don't want to feel very like rectangular and board like. And I've had women tell me like, yeah, no, this is like working towards the goal of this vacation or this trip or this photo shoot. But in reality, really uncovering like, what is it that motivates you about said goal? If it is getting on stage, if it is, losing 10 pounds, is it the fact that like, for me, I love the idea and like being able to be in a physique where I feel comfortable that like I can go into my closet and I never have to worry about like, how are my clothes going to fit? Or am I going to like what I look like in the mirror? Am I going to see my reflection and think that, I'm a little soft or I'm a little flabby? And I like the freedom of being able to put on like anything in my closet and being able to be like, yeah, this looks the way I want it to. And I like my reflection. And I think being very distinct with like what it is that motivates you about these goals, I think that can be helpful. So if you are thinking about this and you're like, okay, I don't really know if it is scale weight or body fat percentage, but it's some combination of the two, really try to get granular with like, but what about it motivates you? So the next step, creating a plan, and not just a plan, a good one. We've all probably been there where we followed diets that like seemingly if you just follow it, you will lose weight and you will look the way that you hope to look. But just because you can execute on it. Just because it is a plan doesn't mean that it was efficient, doesn't mean that it wasn't incredibly like fluffy in terms of the details and the nuance. And I think when you know your end game, when you know the destination, maybe that is like, hey, I want to have a six pack. Like I want to be able to work out in a sports bra. And when I look in the mirror, I want like generally to see good visibility. Consider how much body fat you'll likely have to lose. And it can be confusing with body fat because DEXs can be highly inaccurate, so can calipers. So maybe instead of looking at a percentage, thinking more in terms of scale weight. Like if you were someone who wants full visibility in your abs, but let's say right now you're closer to 25 to 30% body fat. So realistically, assuming you don't store body fat exclusively in your stomach, we might need to take you closer to 20%, maybe even 15%, depending on your muscular development in your abdomen. But a general rule might be to aim for just losing half a pound, 1 pound, 1.5 pounds per week until you get to the point where you begin to see what it is that you're looking for. So I think abdominal definition is something that a lot of people, that's what they want to see when they're trying to lose body fat, or even just like a tighter waistline relative to shoulders and hips. And if that's the case, what I would do is map out like, okay, I'm going to lose somewhere between 7 to 10 pounds, if that's how much you need to lose. For some people, it might be 5. For some people, it might be 15. But mapping it out, like here's the amount of weight that I think would lend to me getting into the shape that I want. And if you're not sure, I would always err on the side of a slightly longer timeline. But when I say timeline, I really mean like the amount of duration, the amount of weeks that you're going to spend working towards this goal. And in the case that you are losing at half a pound, how many weeks would it take theoretically if you were to lose consistently, which half a pound, that might be a little more reasonable. A pound, pound and a half, that might mean that there are weeks that you don't lose nearly as quickly. How many weeks would it take? And I think aiming for somewhere between, I guess, anywhere from like 6 to 25 weeks, depending on how much weight you want to lose and how quickly you want to do it. But I generally would afford multiple weeks to give you time as a buffer. I would also plan in a diet break right around like the 6 to 10 week mark, depending on how long you're going to diet. And this doesn't mean that it's like a free for all. It doesn't mean that like you're gaining weight back. All it means is that during this time, we're raising food to a point that is going to allow you to assess what you're doing, assess if you like what you're doing, if it feels good, if you're happy with the progress, if you're ready to, kind of kick it into the next gear and, go a little faster, or if it's like, hey, this is really hard as is. I think realistically, I'm only going to be able to do this for another 4 to 6 weeks. And then from there, creating a game plan of how you're going to transition out. But I think in the case that you were like aiming for a specific weight loss target, I see no reason why you wouldn't at least have like general guidelines of like how much weight you want to see lost per week. And then when we get into like how to actually design this, it kind of comes down to how hard you're going to diet, because a moderate deficit, losing half a pound per week, that takes a 250 calorie deficit a day. This can get muddy though if you're doing untracked meals, if you're not adequately reporting your food, if your activity one day, like me today, if your step count's not going to be super high and your training session's going to be a little later, so maybe not as intense. We have to really consider like what is the minimum amount of deficit that's going to allow us to see scale weight progress that we're satisfied with. Because oftentimes what I find is that a lot of clients, they want to see progress, and if they don't see it within those first 2 weeks, they begin to get really discouraged, and they find that like now adherence begins to slip, now food reporting begins to slip, and this can make it really hard and really discouraging. So I would actually lean towards starting a diet and being really like decisive with how many pounds you want to lose per week. So if it's 1 pound, okay, that requires a 500 calorie deficit. So in the case you're doing an untracked meal, that means that you might have to be mindful. And generally I would say like in the case where you can avoid doing a complete free for all, that's going to, better suit you. But a more aggressive deficit, 750 to 1,000 calories per day. That, yes, will speed up scale weight drops, but can also risk muscle breakdown and higher stress. So we have to consider like what is the return for losing at a faster rate. And if you do have to lose, let's say 15, 20, 25, 30 pounds, really consider compliance and the sustainability. If you're the kind of person who thrives on a challenge and you can just like flip the switch. There are no like external factors that are going to make this diet harder. Amazing. But if you're someone who's still in the process of developing that skill of dieting, and you find that like it's actually pretty hard for you to just not overeat, period, or not to snack, or not have things in like, how do I want to say this? Have things that you consume that are technically off plan. If that's something you currently struggle with, then you might need to consider this when you're like mapping out the timeline, the length of time, the degree in which you're aiming for change. But the more shredded you want to be, the lower body fat that you want to get to, the more you need to dial in, because dietary fatigue is going to accumulate whether you lose weight or not. Your perception and the stress of actually being in a deficit for many people is very real, even if they're losing at a very slow rate. So I wouldn't like half commit. The whole idea of like, let's dip our toes in the water and see how we do on a diet. Like, sure, in theory, but like once you do that for a week and once you know like, hey, I can stick with this, and then from there, I would start to get really intentional in seeing what kind of productivity you can accomplish. But I think if you're chasing like very low body fat levels, it's going to hurt to get down each percentage. And like the leaner that you get, it's going to be harder. And I mean, it in a way is going to be more rewarding, because like losing a pound at my weight at 145, like not a lot really shows up on my physique, versus when I'm 125, it's like a pound is a night and day difference, because simply there is less body fat. So keep that in mind when you're setting targets in terms of scale weight and then your level of execution. Another aspect to this is considering like, will your rate of change? Will you continue to maintain the same rate of change the entirety of the diet? So let's say we're dieting for 24 weeks. Okay. Well, if the first 12 weeks, if you're coming from a higher body fat, like maybe we can go at a little bit faster of a rate. Maybe we can get 12 pounds down. And then the next 12 weeks, it's like, okay, depending on where body fat is, 12 pounds down, 12 weeks into the diet, maybe it does make sense to slow this down. Maybe it makes sense to go down to half a pound per week. So maybe instead the next 12 weeks of this 24-week diet, you're only losing 6 pounds for a total of 18 pounds. And if that resembles more so like a rate of change that is sustainable and is going to be conducive with you being successful, then I'd much rather have someone do that than just 24 weeks of straight 1 pound change. If after the first 12 weeks, if it makes it that much harder to even like stay on track. So maybe initially planning the first leg of the diet, building in diet breaks, you can kind of assess, be like, does the rate of change need to be adjusted? Does it need to slow down? And very rarely, what I would say, I find people like very rarely, I would say it makes sense to begin to increase the rate of change the leaner you're getting. Fat loss is going to be easiest when you are higher body fat. Fat loss gets harder the leaner you get. And even though you might not have as much to lose, it just can be more costly in terms of fatigue. So the plan should be, the starting point, but not this unbreakable, unmodifiable strategy. I would do it very systematically. And if you're in a position where you can go a little bit slower and use things like refeeds, diet breaks to just again, like drop off fatigue, you're probably going to look better for it. So I would write down your timeline, like the amount of time that you need to diet for to lose X amount of weight, and then divide this over that period. I would approximate daily calories based on the deficit that you need to be in. And I would look at like the later half of the diet, either the second half or the last quarter, last third, and really try to delineate like, okay, if I'm ahead of schedule or if I'm on track, would it make sense to slow things down later on once I am leaner? So step number 3, execution. Execution is where a lot of people fall off. And let me tell you, like, the best plan can't help you if you're not doing it. I have had people come to me who are like, I think it's the plan that's off. Like, I think the plan itself sucks. And like, once we start digging into it, it's actually like, no, the plan is very solid. Like, they have enough time to lose weight, but for some reason, this or that, they're not able to adhere to it. Now, I talk about adherence a lot. I talk about food reporting a lot. For individuals who struggle with rigidity and like feeling like, okay, I can't follow a meal plan because it just mentally, it kind of fucks with me. I want to have the flexibility to, make decisions. I want to have the autonomy to switch things out, throughout the day if I need to. I get it. I do. But there is a level of responsibility that comes with this flexibility and this autonomy. And I think for a lot of people, they can misrepresent and misreport what they're eating and convince themselves truly that they're eating 13, 14, 1,500 calories. But in reality, when it comes out to it, it's like they're using oils on all of their foods. They're adding little things here and there. They're not really taking a good inventory of all these extra calories. And it's not to say that you have to be super rigid with it. I do very much believe in some degree of like a slush fund, that maybe there are things that you enjoy that you're like, I don't want to remove this. Okay. In that case, we need to make sure that however much flexibility or ability to guesstimate is within the diet is conducive with them still seeing that target rate of change per week. So in the case that someone's not seeing a specific rate of change, like you're aiming for a pound a week, and let's say you're at like objectively what me, the coach, and you agree is like, this should be a deficit, but then like, I'll just use, the number 1,400 calories, because for most people that should be enough to drive a little bit of a deficit. Let's say that they're not losing nearly what you would think. They're closer to that half pound or even less than that. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to definitely look at like, okay, cardio. Is there some aspect to their cardio that they're misreporting or not aware that like they're varying the modality or the heart rate to an extent that it actually is impacting them? Are they not sleeping enough? And like, are we experiencing weight fluctuations that are skewing this report? How do their measurements look? How do their photos look? Are we seeing scale weight, just kind of like, slow down, but like on their physique, it does indeed look better? Or is there an aspect in their diet, in their food reporting, that could be improved? And I see this all the time. People will be like, well, I just had sweet green, or I just had kava, or I just had chipotle. And they're having it multiple times a week, not realizing that there are varying degrees of calories in each of the component of the meal. And even though it might be okay and acceptable when you're not in a fat loss phase, and you could argue and say it is acceptable in a fat loss phase, but we also can't turn the other cheek to the fact that like you're not losing. So these things that are harder to control and have a high degree of variability, this might be the area to tighten up on. So, and it's not something that I think many people necessarily need this reminder of. I think they're generally pretty aware of it, but I think it can be helpful to have a coach kind of weigh in and be like, okay, so we're in agreement, like this should be a low enough amount of food that facilitates like a good rate of loss. So if we're not seeing that, and we've like eliminated the fact that this could be a weight fluctuation, like it truly does come down to the energy deficit that you're in, then all we have to look at is food reporting. And this is, again, barring any kind of hormonal imbalance, any kind of thyroid downregulation. But I can tell you that like the leaner you want to be, the tighter your adherence needs to be. And realistically, like the experience of having to be strict with your diet feels very different person to person. Like some people are like, hey, I simplify all of my meals so that there is no ability to deviate unless like I have to really go out of my way to deviate. I do find that people who track macros and are very intuitive with their meals, they have more opportunity to go off track. They have more opportunity for hidden calories to get into their diet, into their body. So it could be something that if you're like, hey, respectfully, don't want to follow the meal plan, still want to track, what I would start by doing is really simplifying those food decisions and making really like the cooking process very standardized so that there isn't a high degree of variance in how you cook your rice, how you cook your potatoes. I would go about weighing everything raw and seeing if there is a vast discrepancy in what you're reporting versus what you're eating. And then in the case that you are undulating the food choices every single day, I would reduce that. I would still have like a couple things that, like, hey, I can fit this into my calories and it works with my diet, but I would be very cognizant of how often these shifts are occurring, because like this happens to me all the time. Like I'll go a few days without sweet green, I'll have sweet green, and even though I am tracking it, I still know that there is a degree of variability in the serving sizes, there's a degree of variability in the sodium, and it's something that very much can be reflected on scale weight the next day. And this isn't like your coach coming at you and being like, you can't do any of these things that you enjoy, or you can't eat any foods that you enjoy. But I do think there needs to be a very tight system in place to quantify whether or not you deviated. So when I've gotten my leanest, like I realized like I needed to tighten up on everything. So all of those little harmless like nibbles or things that like seemed like, oh, this is okay. And this could even be as simple as like, hey, like if you're cooking and you're trying a different recipe each night, if you're using different seasonings, this could be including, or I guess introducing aspects of sodium, which is ultimately going to show up on scale weight and going to affect the look the next day and affect digestion. These are all things that can work against you. So that's where I like to really simplify this and ask a client, be like, hey, how much of your day is flexible, and are you exercising that flexibility, and how much of it is regimented, how much of it is just built in and you kind of eat the same thing every day and it's prepared in a very similar way. Because if someone is truly like at a loss, like I don't know what's causing this decrease in fat loss, or I don't know why I'm not seeing the results like seemingly I should see, this would be, I would say, the most effective way to get an answer to this. Another component to this: how often will you check in? So I recommend someone doing a standard, like a regimented check-in at least every 7 to 10 days. Once a week is very simple to plug in. And I know for some people, they're like, yeah, but what if I don't use the restroom on day 7? What if I didn't sleep well? What if, I got my period? You can absolutely push this off 1 or 2 days. It's not the end of the world. But I would say making a commitment that every 7 to 10 days, you're going to take progress pictures. You're going to measure specific body parts that would be indicative that you're losing weight or you're gaining weight. And also logging some kind of subjective feedback around how do you feel about this week? How did this week go? Some kind of data reporting. There are very much weeks where I can go in and be like, I did not like my pictures, and I very much feel like it's not representative of how hard I worked. Yet once I actually take them and compare them side by side, I realize no, you actually did lose weight this week and you lost an appropriate amount, and it's reflected in your weigh-ins. It's just coming down to you're not experiencing what you hoped to experience. You don't feel the way you thought you would, even having lost the weight. And I see that very often. This is why I think the objective data is super important. So I would do daily weigh-ins to establish both the weekly average as well as a high and low for the week. I know not everyone likes that psychologically, and that can be a little bit of an ask, but I can tell you that being someone who struggled seeing that fluctuation, it is really nice, and it's almost forced on you to be cool, it went up 1.5 pounds and I didn't do anything differently. There was no reason or rhyme, and it could be just simply that I didn't use the bathroom nearly as much as I did yesterday, and that's okay. It could be that you slept like shit even though you got 8 hours, maybe 6 of those hours was only quality sleep, and 2 you were very restless. And I think if you put this off, that is more of a detriment. I think confronting objectively these changes is very helpful because you can't avoid them. And I think specifically if we're talking about off season or a build, this is super important, because if we're trying to mitigate unnecessary body fat gain, this can be a really big asset to the approach to building muscle, is knowing when that body fat is creeping up a little too quickly. Now I have one client who does the weigh-ins, is kind of sparse with her spreadsheet. She's like, I'm not going to do measurements. I just don't want to do them. So instead I'm going to get a DEXA done every 3 weeks. She has a little membership to a body spec. And for her, actually going in is kind of an anticipatory event. She's excited to go see what the results tell her, and she likes having that longer gap. So I think it's okay if you're like, hey, I don't want to do measurements, I don't want to do calipers. I think the weigh-ins are important because then we can begin to build data and understand really what patterns are specific to you and which ones we can expect. Because if we don't know what's normal for you, we don't know what's abnormal. So this is why even like during someone's period or the week before, whenever they do experience a little bit of volatility in these weigh-ins, I like to have that data because then each preceding month I can be like, hey, look, it happens every month at the same time in the same capacity, roughly. Another aspect, will you coach yourself or will you get a coach? A coach can help you stay objective. And I've had coaches before. I self-coach at the moment, but it's very likely that I will get a coach as I continue to develop and try to climb the ranks within my competitive career. And I do tell people, I'm like, you can be very informed and very knowledgeable of different domains that, apply to your physique goals. But I think having someone that can fill in those deficits and really help you make sense of some of this data can be really freeing. And I think coaching yourself, yes, it can save you money. It can teach you self-reliance, but it does require you to be brutally honest, which I can say even for myself at times is very much a challenge. And when you're looking at data, I think oftentimes when you're self-coached, you can over-obsess and hyper-focus on aspects that another coach, someone who is not you, who's not assessing their own physique, might be able to differentiate. But if you are someone who needs the accountability, if you are a serial macro cheater or you just go off your diet very often, maybe a coach is the structure that you need to kind of put the bumper rails up so then you have someone to report to each week. But if you're detail oriented and disciplined by nature, self-coaching, it might be fine in different scenarios with different goals. But I would say if this is a goal that you've never taken on, like you've never accomplished, it could very well be helpful to hire a coach that can help fill in some of those gaps that you and yourself, you don't have the formal education on, or you can't really be objective about. Now, the assessment process in the realm of getting shredded, of someone who is like, hey, I am wanting to take myself to a place that I've never been before. Execution is going to be paramount. But how do you gauge if it's working? How do you differentiate between going flat and not having a high degree of glycogen in your muscles, losing some water retention from drops in carbs, drops in sodium? And I think it's important to understand this even if you do have a coach. I would really consider like what dictates a good check-in. So I think for me, what defines a good check-in is being relatively close to the rate of loss that I was aiming for. So for me, yeah, like I might say like right now, I want to see a 1% rate of loss. But if I'm at 0.8 or 0.9% for the week, and I know that multiple weigh-ins were done a little bit earlier, or I didn't really use the bathroom, or there were just days I didn't sleep as well, so I know those high weigh-ins are skewing that weekly average, and if they were a little more accurate, it would be closer to that 1% rate of loss per week. Well, then I feel good about it. And largely that's been how this like fat loss phase, the current one I'm in, has gone. Is there's been weeks where I'm like, yeah, like I am PMSing and I know that I'm creating a big enough deficit through diet and cardio, but I know on the scale I'm just a little bit short of that 1% rate of loss per week, which realistically at 150 pounds or 145 pounds, it's like that is a pretty significant deficit. So some kind of allowance early on, I think, is completely fine in those kind of circumstances, or at least that's what I deem to be acceptable. I also define success though as like how honest am I being with myself about how I'm feeling? How solution oriented am I being? Am I reporting thoughts that are a little negative that I need to pay closer attention to, or that I have the opportunity to correct? Really, if it was a rough week, I think just simply like logging that and being very honest that like this week was tough. I think that's important. It breaks my heart when I hear clients, they're like, yeah, like I didn't want to share with you like what I was going through because I didn't want it to affect what we're doing, or didn't want you to think less than me or think that I'm weak. And I'm like, no, like these are very real things, and your ability to communicate these stressors that might not be tied to the program that we're on is super helpful. And it does give me the ability to make concessions, or even like understand that like this next week, even though initially maybe I would have dropped food, it might not be what's best for you. Now, when we talk about a good check-in. Like for me, for clients, a good check-in is them submitting training videos. So even though I'm self-coached, I'm still like, yeah, like I need to take some kind of video footage every week to make sure that like I'm keeping an eye on how I'm moving, paying attention to any discrepancies I have in terms of function or access to different ranges of motion. Now, when it comes to competing, I mean, like I think an aspect to this is also going to be the posing. So something that I've been prioritizing within my check-in process is ensuring that even if I don't record it, I'm still bringing my heels to the gym. I'm still making time to do 5 to 10 minutes of posing. And whether that be focused more on like my walk or holding my poses or just like getting comfortable in the heels, it's still something that like, as I look back on in my check-in, I'm like, this would be a concern if I know that it's a deficit and I know I didn't prioritize it. So there are aspects to assessing a check-in, even like assessing, did you lose the right amount of weight? But then there's also like, what did this week look like and what areas did you not execute on nearly as well? And that's very much why, like I tell my clients, like if you were trying to get super shredded, if you were trying to really take your body to a new level of conditioning, we need to have this dialed in, and not necessarily so much on the posing unless you're competing, but like we need to have high reporting of measurements, of pictures, of scale weight. So those are kind of like non-negotiables. And when clients ask me like, hey, like what do I need to do to like really take it to the next level? What do I need to do to achieve this goal that's new for me? I'm like, these are the fundamentals. Like you're also going to have to develop mental grit and be able to push through some of, really that I would say like that discomfort that's going to come with getting to new body fats for the first time. But from a reporting standpoint, I need to have the necessary information. And I think it's important if you're self-coaching to be able to audit this and be like, yeah, you know what, this week I didn't show up for myself in these ways, so I'm going to do that differently. And this is exactly why on my check-in form, I have an area that's like areas for improvement. And I ask clients, I'm like, what did you do okay this week, or what did you not do that well that you want to kind of call yourself out on for this next week, so that we know like it's something you're aware of and you know that if you were to do it, it would actually result in a better week next week. Now, number 5, knowing when to adjust. Now, there's a point in terms of getting as lean as you need to be to achieve said goal, whether that's weight or a visibility of like a specific metric, like your abs or your glutes. There's a point where you do need to be able to call it and really make that assessment that like, hey, I don't have enough muscle to continue sustaining this. And this is a big question. And plenty of people realize like mid-diet, even if they drop 10 more pounds, that they might just appear smaller, not necessarily as shredded, or even in turn a little more stringy, not as curvy as they desire. And I would say like really in the essence that you were trying to build a fit physique, not just a very stringy and like grainy physique. This is something that I would consider really at that diet break is like, do I like how things have been going? Is the rate of loss acceptable? Do I need to be tighter with execution? Is there anything I'm doing that's making this fat loss phase that much harder? And largely, do I have enough energy in reserve? Do I have enough gas in the tank to get me where I need to be to hit that destination? Now, in the case that you're using your glutes as like, that's your destination, you're trying to have fully visible tie-ins, but you get to that diet break and you're like, hey, like I'm 10 pounds above stage weight. And I know that like, I probably have another 10 pounds of fat, yet my upper body's already shredded, my core's already shredded. You could actually shift at this point to more of a reverse diet or even another build phase. But I think it's important to be able to take that week, in the case of we're talking more of like a longer horizon, take that week and really assess like, will you benefit from continuing to see out this goal? And I think for some people, it's like, yeah, that diet break or that intermediary, that middle point is a really good time to begin to reflect on like what you've done well, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And even in like more of a micro sense, you could do this on a weekly basis within your check-in. And I think it's important if you have a coach to kind of gather their feedback, like what are things that you could be doing better that maybe they're not prompting you with. And I think how I want to close this out is like, getting to low levels of body fat can be very, very uncomfortable. And that's where I would try initially to set yourself up in a way that you can manage fatigue. You can go in with clear expectations and a very clear understanding of what is needed in order for you to get to that destination. But probably the most important thing about all this is having a clear and defined destinations that you are trying to achieve. If you're forcing your body to just continue to do the cardio and do the deficit and restrict food, yes, like that is a component of getting very lean, but there is a point where that's no longer helpful and you'll actually look worse because of it. And looking worse, I mean, like that's like best case scenario. Worst case scenario is you lose muscle. So then like your actual composition shifts in a way to where your body fat is not nearly as lean as you would have had it if you retained that muscle. Now, keeping adherence high, that is so important. And even being able to admit or to discuss with your coach or with, a close, trusted mentor, partner, whatever, whether or not you have all the tools necessary to be adherent. I think that's super important, but you can absolutely reach high levels of conditioning. So very low body fat percentages, even as a female, even as a natural athlete, there are definitely like health impacts to sustaining this. So it's something I would be very intentional of. Remember, shredded is a very ambiguous term. It's a moving target. And once you're there, you might love it, but you also might find that like, hey, it's fucking hard and it's not really sustainable to sit here year round. And that's completely okay. I think it's important to expect for training to go down, fatigue to go up, to sleep to be a little disrupted, for libido to be disrupted, for hunger to go up. And this might be something that you dabble in and you do, and you're like, okay, cool, I was able to do this, but now I want to scale back and find a body fat percentage that is still very fit and still very lean, but not necessarily like peeled, because I need to find that middle ground that is sustainable for me to kind of float in and around. You guys, thank you so much for this. Thank you for listening. If this was helpful, let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you, and I will see you in the next one.